Welcome to Made for Mondays, the source for digging a little deeper into the Believers Church Sunday messages and finding ways to apply them to our daily lives. Together, let's take a deeper look and find a way to bring Mondays.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to this week's Made for Monday podcast. I'm Joe. I'm happy to host this morning. Who are you, ladies and gents?
I thought you were just going to say ladies.
I was looking right at Rhonda and I was like, Heather's usually like, who are you, gentlemen?
That's a gentlemanly way to do it, though. Like ladies first.
That's right.
Go ahead, Ron. That's good.
Yes, well, as we all know, I'm Rhonda. Great. It's great to be here today.
Hey, Rhonda.
Good to have you here, and your voice.
Yeah.
Yep.
That's great.
Thanks.
And I'm Jamie.
My name's Doug. Such a good intro.
Yeah, that was strong, solid, solid.
Do you want to introduce who you have with you
I don't
yet?
know his
or
name.
You want to just,
Do you know? This belongs to Rhonda's mom.
Yeah.
So yeah, but I thought I'd have him on the pod just because he made a special appearance yesterday, and maybe it went over so well.
Yeah.
I might start using him all the time.
Oh, boy.
Listen,
Yeah. I mean,
whatever works.
Let's not overcorrect.
Yeah, I think I'm gonna introduce him every now and again. Yeah.
Love it.
Awesome. Well, we had a lot going on this weekend, so I can't wait to hear about it. So what did we do?
Well, for me, I mean, we'll talk about free market, I'm sure, but I had jury duty on Friday.
Oh, you did? You had to call in.
I got called in, and I served on a jury, first time ever.
oh, well.
Yeah, it was weighty
Yeah.
having to convict someone of a serious crime.
Oh, so you just jumped right into like conviction day?
It was like a
you
one-day
don't-
trial,
It's just
right?
a one-day trial.
Oh, wow.
Yeah,
Okay.
yeah. There was one witness for the prosecutor, and there was no witnesses for the defense.
Oh, wow.
And we deliberated for about 30 minutes or so.
Unanimous?
It has to be
Has to be,
unanimous,
yeah.
yeah, which is kind of interesting. There were two holdouts,
Oh, yeah.
and after we got further instruction from the judge, the two holdouts folded, and the guy was convicted. But yeah, it was not a great way to spend my day
Your
off.
Friday.
Yeah, I hear you.
Yeah.
But it was an interesting experience. I mean, I will say that. But
I can see your toe in the line a little bit because you're not allowed to talk about but so much of it.
I mean, I don't
think.
know. I think it's public record now. I
Okay.
probably could, but I'm not going to. But, yeah. But it was a criminal trial.
Yeah.
And he was convicted of 3 felonies.
Okay.
So, yeah.
And you were on call all month, so you're good now.
I think I'm good now. I sent him an email.
Send
to
who an
ask
email?
There's someone who's in
Okay.
charge of the jury pool, and I sent them an email and said, now that I've served, do I have to keep calling? Because I'm technically still on
Yeah.
until like the first few days of November. But I think since I've served, I think I'm done. But I'll find out.
I
I'm
kind of
sure
want to be
they'll
on jury
respond.
duty.
Oh, yeah.
Nice.
Yeah, it's not. I've been on the call a couple times, but I've never had to actually go in and serve. So
Yeah.
it's tense.
I went one time and was dismissed. And this time I just kind of knew. I could tell by the way things were going that I was going to get roped in this time. So they called everyone by name, had to stand up, and everyone else was still sitting down. And I'm like, yeah, that's about right. There was 13 of us.
Yeah.
And so everyone who's seated, you can leave. Everyone who's standing, you're the jury. It's like, so yeah.
Did you have a moment where you had to like just say something about yourself? Like,
I sent Sam a text and said I'm
Oh, yeah.
How do you do
married
this?
to my mother because that's what he said when he introduced himself.
it's one of my favorite stories of all time.
I know, it's a great
So
story.
good.
My mother? Why did I say my
Why would I
mother?
say that? I'm not married to my mother.
And then he got dismissed.
Yeah, he
There you
did
go.
Immediately, they're like, just please remove yourself, sir.
The only way to get out of those is to get stuck in an elevator. That's what I did.
Oh, wow.
Oh, really?
We got stuck in the elevator, like literally could not get out. They had to call the fire department. Fire
Wow.
department came and got us out. And then we stood before the judge and like getting ready to do the whole jury selection. And he's like, which one of you got stuck in the elevator? And like the 10 of us raised our hands and are like, you're gone. You're out.
Really?
Yeah. I'm like,
Wow.
awesome. Super. So
think
just
I'd-
get stuck in the elevator.
I
Just
think I'd rather be on jury duty.
Well,
Where were you stuck?
Yeah.
there was one lady that worked really hard to get off to get eliminated, you could just tell. Like she worked every angle there was. How many of you, would say that you would be prejudiced against the Commonwealth of Virginia? She's like, I am. How many of you would be prejudiced because of the age of the defendant? She raised her hand, and then she says, "How old is he?" And every second question, she would say, "Can you repeat that?" Like this lady is working hard to get eliminated, and she did. Good for her.
Well, that's funny.
Yeah, it was pretty funny.
All right, so we had some good stuff going on church-wise.
Oh wait, Doug had an exceptional weekend.
Yeah. So we do a yearly trip with our B group to Old Reg.
Yeah,
and it was so just restful. I mean, oddly enough, right? It's a really tough hike, but it was very peaceful and restful, and just rejuvenating in so many ways. So
with your B group,
yeah. So we had 4 guys that were able to make it this year.
Oh, nice!
And
it's a great hike.
Such a good hike.
Every time I do it, I think that's probably the last time I'm going to do it because my knees are killing me by the time I'm done with it. But it is really great.
Yeah, same. I realized on the way down, because hiking down that mountain is way harder than hiking up.
It is.
And every step down, my knee was just screaming.
Yes.
So I got to the bottom. I was like, I need to do way more for next year just to prep. But yeah, it was so good. We had such good conversation and just a lot of time just to talk about life and what God's doing and
That's awesome.
how He's just moving. And some of the closest guys in my life right now through my B group. So really, really cool.
Good.
Yeah,
Awesome.
Love it. I had a great weekend. We started Friday. It was homecoming weekend for Western Branch.
It was.
And so Friday
Parade
started.
goes right by my house.
It does. You can see it. I wondered how you were going to tell all your guests about it.
Yeah, I do have to tell them.
Yeah.
If you want to go
By the
somewhere,
way-
you got to leave before 4 or after 6.
Right. But we got to show up for a whole bunch of our students and kids, actually, because the parade is the primary, the intermediate, and the middle and high school. So it was just really great to be there to show up. So that was super fun. And then we, in Next Gen Students, we gave away a whole bunch of pizzas and drinks and gave out invite cards to our next rally on the 30th, which
awesome.
we're really excited
great.
about.
That's
So
cool.
85 invite cards went out.
Oh,
and
so
That
good.
is
it was
so
super
awesome.
great. Yeah. And then Saturday, of course, we had the free market, which we had 25 vendors. And it was great because the fire alarm went off. And when the fire alarm went off, that just meant everybody had to get out of the building and come see us.
Oh, yeah?
So it was great. I don't know if it was planned. Of course, it wasn't planned. But they had the hazer on in the building.
I think Heather pulled the alarm.
Oh, did she?
Yeah, to get everyone
Yeah,
outside.
yeah, absolutely. I think they put the hazer on for the haunted house inside the building, and as soon as it happened, it set it off. So, but it was great. I mean, we had about an extra 75 to 100 people that came into
That's awesome.
the free market. We
Yeah.
got to chat with, and those are always the best, right?
Yep.
Like just when we talk about being able to build relationships with people in what we do, it's those kinds of events that I love that we do them.
Yep.
Yep.
And it was like the same thing that happened on Friday night too, is because we weren't just doing something or we weren't just handing out something, but we got to have conversation and build relationships with students. And it was just so amazing.
That's so
so
good.
amazing.
I love that.
So, yeah.
And what I love about both of those events is we say it all the time, right? We try to be love to our community. And so we've been, as a staff, thinking of, creative ways that we can not hold the things here, all the events here. And so to have both of those events, to be there at Western Branch and then to be at Cherry Middle School, it was really good. I had a baseball game. I had to leave a little bit early. Free markets. How did it finish up? Did their fall fest? Was that pretty cool?
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it was great.
Yeah,
it was great.
That's cool. I love that. All right. Anything else fun this weekend? I'll say I'm digging. I love the fall festival vibe, fall vibe. So we're all in. We went to Smithfield last night. They had a little fall fest thing. We're planning on Greenbrier Farms, I think, this weekend. So I can't get enough of it.
Nice.
Nora is saying Pumpkin Fest. She wants to keep going to the Pumpkin Fest. Yeah. All right. So we in our weekly readings, we are in John, the book of John, and this week we are in chapter 6 and 7. So did anything stand out to you in chapter 6 and 7?
Chapter 6 is what we read this morning, and that's a tough chapter. That's the blood and flesh of Jesus
Right.
chapter.
Yeah.
Yes.
I was thinking as I was reading it, I don't think I've ever heard a sermon on John 6. Have you?
I don't think so. It's typically when, like, we treat it just like the disciples. They're like, wow, Jesus, that's a really difficult teaching to try to figure out. What were you talking about?
Right.
Yeah, it's weird. It's tough.
And he just keeps doubling down on it. Like every time someone's like, yeah, I don't really understand. And then he just kind of repeated himself. Yeah, you got to eat the flesh and drink the blood. And
Yeah.
oh man, it's rough.
I had to listen to it twice.
It's a rough one.
Yeah.
But the response of, so a bunch of people left, because it was just too weird a thing. They didn't understand it, and people were offended. But then when Jesus asks the 12, "Are you going to leave too?" And I love that response where they say, "Where else are we going to go?"
Yeah.
Yep.
It may be hard, may be difficult, but who else are we going to turn to? I just think it's really cool.
Yeah, and when Jesus was just talking about, like, you don't believe, like you're seeing the things, but yet you don't believe. And I love, like, in the New Living Translation, Peter's reply is, Master, to whom shall we go? You alone have the words that give eternal life, and we believe them and know you are the Holy Son of God. And man, like Peter could have responded so many different ways. I mean, I don't know the things, Jesus. Like, I don't get it all, but I know who you are.
Yeah.
And it's so powerful. And Peter went on to deny him.
Yeah.
But yet he knew who Jesus was.
Yeah.
And such a key verse in this whole scenario. So good.
Yeah. And it kind of fits in with the series we're in right now too. Like, with listening to all these other voices and all these other ideas, like, Jesus is king, and we listen to him, even though sometimes it doesn't make a lot of sense, and sometimes it might not be very convenient. It would be easier just to walk away and just to, like, I don't get this. This is weird, and let me just live my life over here where it's way more comfortable and understandable sometimes.
Yeah.
And yet, like you said, Rhonda, like, if Jesus is king, then his words matter, and it's okay if I take a little bit of time to try to figure it out. Yeah. Because where else am I going to go?
Yep.
Yeah. Like, who else has that thing that I so desperately need?
Yeah.
Yeah.
The words of life.
Yeah. So as we're going through these Gospels, I love trying to find, like, little snippets of how we can model ourselves after Jesus. And I found one in this week's reading. It was right after he fed the 5,000. So what a miracle that was. And it says there at the end, after people saw the sign Jesus performed, they began to say, surely this is the prophet who has come into the world. So Jesus, knowing that they intended to come and make him king by force, withdrew again to the mountain by himself. So it's hard to envision, like, Jesus being overwhelmed, but I think that's what is relatable to us. Like, in this scenario, I think we can take that as, like, anytime we're feeling overwhelmed, like, that's what we say all the time, right? Find a spot and go talk to your Father. I think that's what he was doing there. Yeah. So I thought that was really good. So if you haven't followed along with us, we're doing our yearly reading plan through the Gospels, and it's not too late. So jump on in to our app every week, and every day there's a different reading through the Gospels, and we're going through John right now.
Yep.
So yesterday was great.
It was
Great
good.
Sunday. We're in week 3 of Divided We Stand.
Yep.
And we talked about running mates. So I know you had already mentioned the podcast yesterday because you were excited about this first part. So the history of the vice presidency. Can you?
So when we were a baby country, the vice president was the runner-up, which I just think is wild.
No, and I didn't know that.
I didn't know that either until I was prepping for the message, and one of my Google searches turned that up, and I was like, "What? That's crazy!"
Can you imagine?
So, the law was changed. I guess the Constitution was changed in 1804 when the 12th Amendment to the Constitution was ratified, and the amendment was proposed after the 1796 election resulted in President John Adams and Vice President Thomas Jefferson from opposing parties. So you had the president, vice president, 2 different parties. And then in 1800, that election led to a tie if you can imagine. That seems wild to think about too. Like we had the almost tie
Right.
of Gore Bush. That was almost a tie, but this was a legit tie. That's pretty incredible. Between Jefferson and Aaron Burr, and they were members of the same party, the Democratic Republican Party, which is kind of funny.
Yeah.
Right.
What was the other party?
That was a party then, apparently. But it took the House of Representatives 36 contentious ballots to break the tie,
Holy
electing
cow.
Jefferson president and Burr vice president. And then in 1804, Jefferson was reelected, and George Clinton became the first vice president under the 12th Amendment. So George Clinton was the first one that was chosen by the president as the running mate.
Yeah.
So, yeah, that's just kind of a little interesting bit of trivia
I
there.
love it.
For sure.
That's crazy.
Kind of wild. Yeah. So we were talking earlier about what would be the most.
Craziest in recent
Right.
history.
Yeah. Do you want?
Bush Gore.
Yeah, like
Yeah.
for whatever reason, because I think that's when I was growing up and I started taking an interest in politics, and that was like the big weird election where, like, I forgot how long it took, but it seemed like a
took a while.
significant amount of time
Yeah.
to determine who was president.
Yeah.
So that would have been devastating for the person who was vice president.
Yeah.
Like, oh, are you serious?
Yeah. Well, if nothing else, when I was reading that, it made me think, like things are wild politically now, but things were pretty wild in 1800 too.
Yeah.
So like there's nothing new, and we can all take a deep breath. A couple hundred years later, we're still going.
Yeah.
It
Thing.
didn't break us.
Yeah.
So
That's right.
yeah, we can hang in there.
And I think that, like, if I remember correctly, John Adams and Jefferson, they were enemies.
Yes.
But then later in life became really good friends. And we're just like pen pals writing back and forth. And I think
Look
they
at how
both.
hopeful you're being.
Yeah, no, and it's
Yeah, I
amazing.
love that.
And it's so funny because you see this where you see presidents they're in opposition in the elections, and then afterwards once
So you
they
think
retire,
they're going to become pen pals?
yeah, totally. But it's amazing how many presidents you see afterwards. They're at these big events, and they're so buddy because I think they've been through it, and they know, like, oh yeah, that's really hard.
Yeah.
And even though we have different views, man, I went
Yeah,
through the
it's
same thing.
it's a pretty elite club.
Oh, yeah.
Former presidents. Yeah.
yeah, so I kind of like that. You see presidents hanging out afterwards. They're like, they're good friends now.
Yeah. Yeah, I think any election where the loser thinks and has maybe justified reason to think that they won, that previous law would just be
Oh yeah.
a nightmare.
Oh gosh.
Yeah. So Jamie, yesterday in your sermon, you gave us a working definition of a running mate for the purposes of our study on Colossians.
Yeah.
So for our listeners out there, would you remind us of what that is?
Yeah, so the running mate's us, basically. Our king doesn't have a vice president, but he does have a running mate, someone who represents him. I mean, that's how it functions now, right? So the vice president pretty much is the one who is the echo chamber of the president. Whatever he's wanting to do, they're helping to make happen. And in essence, that's our role. So our king resides in another kingdom. Here we are. We represent him in this kingdom. And anyone who's placed their faith in Jesus is now the running mate.
Yeah.
For the definition of this sermon.
Yeah, that's good.
Yeah, I think it's cool even in this election that, when we follow our king and we're the running mates, like that changes us.
Yeah.
It changes us. And like they're even trying to use this as a way to get the running mates. Oh, you said this a couple years ago, and now the person you're running with believes this. Well, they're changing. And like I think we see the same in us, right? That we change when we follow our king.
Yeah.
So as running mates, Paul considers suffering a privilege,
Yeah.
that's a wild thought where he was in life, to consider suffering a privilege. So how can we view our suffering, or at least the injustice that we may face, to better relate to Jesus or become more like him?
Yeah, I should have jotted down a verse or two, but there's I think it's in Hebrews, the verse that talks about Jesus learning obedience through suffering. So there's just something very refining about suffering, and we're pretty, logically suffer averse. And yet, it is that thing that kind of forges our character and conforms us to closer to his image. And if our king suffered, and that's kind of the language that Paul was using, he was suffering for the cause of Christ. And so the suffering really had significance and meaning. It wasn't just suffering for the sake of suffering. It was a suffering for the person that he loved. And so he found, meaning and significance in that.
Yeah, that's good. Yeah, there's that one verse that Paul says, to live is Christ and death is gain. And in that sense, like the idea of dying to self, but even like the physical suffering that we will endure and following Jesus, and at some level that's victory.
Yeah.
Like that is to be seen as like a win in a sense, where like you said, we are suffering adverse. We would avoid it, at all costs.
Yeah.
And Jesus as well, like in the garden, he's praying, if there's another way, then I would rather do that other way, but it's not my will, but your will to be done. I think that's just our human nature.
Yeah.
But I guess there's no other way to like as closely identify with Jesus as when we're suffering.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah, and I love that too, because when I think about it, you have to put yourself into like, what were some of the things, like how do we identify, like what does suffering look like for us? And like for Paul, I'm sure like there was some of that he just felt misunderstood in so many ways. And Jesus knew that they didn't believe. They were misunderstanding him all over the place. But it's in that suffering that we can identify, and our relationship with him just grows and gets stronger in that. And so I think the more that we sit in that suffering and understand that we were actually identifying and relating to Jesus, that it changes. It changes how we walk, changes how we live.
Yeah, it does. I had a chance to pray with somebody after the service yesterday, just going through such a difficult medical diagnosis and really just going through it spiritually now because of that. I think a very kind of a new and a fresh relationship with Jesus, him and parts of his family. And so now he's questioning, and rightfully so. Like this is just has come out of nowhere and everything. And I love when a sermon can meet someone right where they're at. And he said he just broke down at this part of the message yesterday because that's what he's facing. And he's asking me like, how do I continue to follow Jesus? I can not question too much and help my family through it. And the best I could tell him is, man, like in the suffering is where the light can shine the brightest. Yeah. And it's like when it's all said and done, no matter the outcome, that how you conduct yourself spiritually with Jesus, your relationship with Jesus through this suffering will speak volumes to people around you. Yeah. It really will. Yeah. So you talked about the importance of finding a church that meets your spiritual development needs and that of your family. So what are some ways that believers invest in people who engage here?
Yeah, I would love for
Yeah,
Why don't you talk about that?
I love that question because Jimmy, you talked a little bit about that yesterday, like how our staff spends hours and hours and hours creating age appropriate and relevant teaching so that we can make sure that we are giving everybody what they need. But I think there's a level of that leads us into not only like the age appropriate Bible teaching that we do at every age level, but then we move into then B groups, and then it's like, okay, now we're talking about the things, but now it's like, where are you? Like, what is happening in your world right now? Let's have conversations and build community around that so we can have deeper conversations. And it draws people because we're meeting them right where they're at. And it's really great. It's really great.
Yeah. How many hours would you say, Doug, that you spend in like one message? How many hours do you spend?
Oh, gosh. Like just for one message?
Yeah, just for one message.
Man, a handful of days of work, I would
Yeah.
assume. Like in the so are we talking about like, because even outside of work hours, right?
Yeah.
And it's so hard to quantify, because like when I'm driving, I'm thinking about it.
Right.
Like I preach to myself when I drive.
Yeah.
My voice memo app has hundreds and hundreds of voice memos of me just like trying to articulate like what I want to say.
Yeah.
So when I'm driving, I'm preaching to myself. We have set aside work hours where we do message prep here. A lot of that's like studying and trying to like find like commentary on difficult verses and trying to connect verses to each other and try to come up with a compelling application for that. So office hours. But then when I'm home, I'm thinking about it.
Yep.
I dream about it.
Yes.
It's not uncommon to wake up at 2:00 in the morning with an idea, and I write it down, and I look at it the next day and I'm like, that's garbage. What was I thinking?
Right.
But I guess technically that counts.
Yeah.
That's work hours towards it.
Yep.
So it is. It like when I'm in message prep mode, I don't think it's not unfair to say it takes a part of like every area of my life in a good way.
In a good way.
Because like I love it, and man, it's just when I can communicate God's word like that, it's so uplifting for me to do that, and hopefully helpful for others.
Yeah.
So just everything in me.
Yeah. So, I wanted to highlight, just that there's so much that we invest as a team to provide, and it's the railing and leading of volunteers. Like, I mean, that's a huge endeavor in and of itself. I mean, there's a couple hundred people volunteering every single week here. So that takes a lot of time. So to provide for people from the church, I think is super important. But my point in the message really was, while that is an important consideration, what Paul was talking about was that he was called to serve the church, and like it is important to consider what you get from your church, but it's also important to consider, how are you serving your church? And so that was, I think both are important, but sometimes I think we favor one over another.
Yeah.
It's cool too, because like looking at the message prep, I mean, how many times are we thinking about a message and our minds go right to a person who is experiencing God here, whether it's like a video testimony or some insight that somebody else has gained, and they share it with us, and that becomes a part of the message too.
Yep.
So you're right, like even that message prep, it's so important that other people are serving and hearing from God to make that a better experience.
Yeah.
So even something like that, it's something that everybody can be a part of in a way.
Yeah.
Yeah, because my friends, the guys in my B group and people I interact with, they inspire me so often.
Yep.
Just to make that a better experience too.
Yeah. It's good.
Yeah.
Yeah. So one of our church values here is it's not about me. And I love that value. I gave a sermon a couple weeks ago at my hometown church where I actually said, in talking about the good works that we do in the name of Jesus, like it's difficult not to, because we live in a culture where celebrating me is the norm. So how do we make sure that we don't slip into the mindset that the church is here to serve me, but instead remember that as followers of Jesus, I'm here to serve the church? It's tough, right?
Go ahead. Yeah.
I guess it starts with like really loving others.
Yeah.
Like if I'm stepping into all this trying to love somebody else, then I can't serve myself alone. And I think that's when it gets difficult, because we can serve out of obligation. We can serve because there's a need. We can serve because we think it's the right thing to do. But if I love that other person, it just comes naturally. And I think that's that growing process. Like, do I really love others to the point where I'm running to the opportunities to serve? I had a chance to talk with somebody yesterday about that very thing. She's excited about serving and trying to figure out where that area is, but she has such a passion to give back and to help others that she's like taking the time to pray about it and think about it, and not just jump in because there's a need, but to find that place where God can use her to really make an impact on the coming generation. And that's so cool. And you see passion, and I think that's the better way of going about it, as opposed to, well, I better check off that block and I got to do this so I can make God happy.
Yeah.
It's not about that. It's about truly loving that other person.
Yeah. It's good.
And when that love is fully alive in you, you can't help but share it. And that is the mission of what we're supposed to do. We got to go be love.
Yeah. Jamie, you said that Paul didn't have a year of serving like we have this year. He had a life of serving.
Right.
So let's talk about that. The puppet.
Yeah, the puppet. I dismissed him. He's no longer here. But yeah, so for Paul, it was his life of serving was because Christ was in him. And so his mission was the same as the mission of Jesus, which was to seek and to save those who are lost. And so that became his mission, because that's what happens when Christ is in you. Whatever he wants to do is what you do. So, yeah, and he went from radical shift of life mission, from stopping the movement of Christ to perpetuating the movement of Christ. And the only thing that changed was who his king was. And that changed his mission. And that's just such a compelling, like, that story of Paul is it ought to be true of every single one of us. Whatever the mission of Jesus was, it should be our mission if he is in us. And so, yeah, there's no retirement in the Bible. There's just a continuation of a pursuit of Jesus and fulfilling his mission as we go through our life. And retirement is when we get to go to the next kingdom, or until he comes back. So yeah, that's what Paul modeled for us, and it's a pretty compelling example, I think.
Yeah, I love the scripture. The Christ in us is our only hope of glory, and like it's our hope of glory. And so when we carry that, like, that's what we've got to give. Like, that's what we have to give is the hope of Jesus. And that better compel us. I mean, earlier we know that he says that it was Christ's love that compelled me to do this, to love, to do that. It's his love that compels us. And so, like, to move forward in that, and to know that it's not just the vertical, it's got to be the horizontal. And when this is alive, when this is fully alive, when we are in communion with Jesus, then the loving others is going to come fully alive.
That's good.
Yeah, I thought yesterday, even though with the visual of the puppet, we really should have named him.
I mean, it might have a name. Is it written inside him somewhere? The puppet's name.
It's a puppet. It's going to have whatever name you give it on the day that you need to use it.
I thought it was a great visual of what we're trying to accomplish with this series, that we're not trying to get too political with this, just equipping us of how we can be more Christ-like in this political season, and to know that, like, that's a very good representation as we go out into the community, and even with on election day when we're out in the community voting and stuff, how we can be more Christ-like and remind ourselves that Christ is in us and how we can treat others.
Yeah. Doug and I, when I was putting this message together, talked about the big idea that we ended up using, what would Jesus do if he were you? And it's kind of the flip of the WWJD, what would Jesus do? It's kind of that, but in reverse. Like, if he was you, what would he be doing?
Yeah.
But yeah, like, just that thought, like, what would it look like for Jesus to be in my home? What would it look like if Jesus were gonna vote in this election? How would he conduct himself? Like, that's a pretty compelling thought. Like, what would Jesus do if he were you? And he is in you. And so that is the very thing that we ought to do. And it's pretty simple and it's pretty straightforward, but it's not easy.
Yeah.
But it's simple.
Yeah, even that statement, like, what would Jesus do? I almost hate how the 90s just made that like a gimmick and a bracelet, because it is so powerful.
It is a powerful thought.
And when I say it now, it's almost like, okay, yeah, like WWJD.
Yeah.
But that idea is like, it's life-changing in so many ways. So I love how you were able to do that, recapture that.
Yeah.
And
put a refresher on that.
Yeah. It didn't feel like just some old like 90s trending back now.
Oh, thanks.
It was like, we have to do this well.
Yeah.
And what you said, Joe, like the idea of like, this has to be more than just political, because that idea, I think the danger could be, if we're looking at this only from a political stance, as soon as the election's over, we're like, cool, we did it.
Yeah.
Now I can go back to whatever I want to do. It's like, no, this is like whatever fills in that gap, whatever that distraction could be. like political or cultural or anything, whatever that thing is that could distract us.
Yeah.
It's
Like
who
what
you
would
are,
Jesus
it's not just
do?
what you do.
Yeah, exactly. Or what season we find ourselves in as a country.
Yeah.
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 Yeah. Jamie, thanks for the reminder that when we are gone, we are not going to Washington.
Yeah.
That was awesome.
Yeah. We don't
meet our
stop by the
king.
White House. That's not the ultimate
That was a
objective.
great reminder heading
Yeah.
into November 5th.
Yeah.
Yeah.
For sure. Well, that is all we have time for today. Thanks for the conversation, you guys. That was great. We're continuing this Sunday our Divided We Stand series, and we hope you will join us and invite somebody to sit beside you. We have on-campus services here at 9 and 10:45, so we hope you'll join us there. And if not, we'll be on YouTube at 1 o'clock.
Can I do a quick
yeah.
plug for Next Gen?
Absolutely.
This coming Sunday is our Next Gen costume party for all of Next Gen. So we're inviting kids and middle schoolers and even high schoolers. You know what? Join us too.
Yeah.
Dress up in your Halloween costume, have a good time, and join us for one of our services. It's going to be really, really exciting.
All right. So there you go. Join us at 9 and 10:45, dressed in your Halloween best. And if not, catch us on YouTube at 1 o'clock. So thanks for joining us today on the pod, friends. Go and be love.